We wanted to start this out and see how this artist and this scientist brainstorm. So, as an artist, as a scientist, what would this better world look like? And we also brought one of your particularly favorite mediums. So if you want to draw as well, Hendrix, I'll hand this over to you. What could this better world look like? What do you imagine it to be?
I didn't know this was going to be a test. Like literally, I would be interested. How do you, when you think about ideas, do you use visual matter first, or do you think of the idea in your head and then put it on paper? Because I cannot think without my hand moving. Like I get ideas through the act of making, as opposed to like thinking of a great idea or thinking about what it means to have a better life. It's more of an embodied notion, a somatic activity that then gets put onto the paper.
I think I basically visualize objects, and that's one of the troubles I had as physics became more and more abstract. I became further and further detached from it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an abstract notion to begin with, for sure, right? Yeah, I mean, for me, well, first of all, I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to talk about this. I think it's when you come to college, like I have this experience teaching young people all the time where you get them, and they've imagined college as this kind of like Dead Poets Society experience where they're going to stand on a desk and think the big thoughts. And sometimes that doesn't happen because you're in a calculus class with like 400 people in it, right? So it's good to like pause and think about the big questions. But I will say, I don't think I'm qualified to have this conversation, for sure. I am definitely outranked on this stage, first of all. But second of all, I think being curious, being interested in the world is kind of like the number one thing to position yourself as you're thinking about big questions. And I enter almost every conversation believing that I'm probably wrong. And I think that's kind of always a healthy attitude.
Thank you for that. Now, and coming at this big question as well, not only do we have a scientist and an artist up here, but we have two people. And we can think about what it means to be a human, to be a person. And you come at these questions with a lot of different backgrounds and worldviews. So I want to ask you both, if you can share some of your background, your worldview. When you come at any type of question, how does how you grew up, what you believe about the world impact that? And what are those beliefs that you have?
You want to start there? You want to take that one?
I'll let you start.
I mean, I think when talking about art, like I get this question a lot, like what is art supposed to be? People seem to be really worried about kind of determining what things count as art. And I think very simply, like art is a way to see the world through someone else's eyes. And whatever that thing is that they've made, that experience, maybe it would be upsetting, maybe it would be revelatory, maybe it's simply an expression of beauty. I think to me, when I approach the making of art, it's because I have something to say actually to the world. It's actually why I'm an illustrator. It's because I have a very clear thing that I want to say. In fact, like I do this sort of like thought exercise with my students. Like if you were on a desert island the rest of your life and had endless art supplies and like food and everything, like don't get hung up on that part of it, okay? Like people get obsessed, like do I have a hotel, whatever my stay? No. You have endless art supplies and you're fine. You're gonna have lots of food. What kind of things would you make if you were truly alone on that desert island? And I think the stuff I would make would be different if I was totally alone, because I think most of the stuff I make is meant to say something to another human being in some form. So I think in many ways, like I'm an artist because I want to communicate with other people. And I think that's why I ended up in the arts as opposed to the sciences or any other place.
Okay. My father was an industrial research chemist. My mother was a college math professor. I had 3 older sisters who kept me in line. The youngest of the 3, the one just older than me, was a misfit in the house because dinner table conversations were largely technical, and she was a musician and an artist. So I married an artist 53 years ago, and that has been a transformative experience. I mean, fantastic. I mean,
all scientists should marry artists and vice versa. I think this is a healthy way to run the universe. Yes.
So I'm going to cut to the quick on this conversation, is that I have spent a whole lot of time studying biology. So I'm trained as a physicist. I'm officially trained as my undergraduate research and my graduate research were all low-temperature physics, cryogenic engineering, liquid helium. I found out that you don't pour liquid nitrogen on the floor in front of a girl you're dating when she's wearing a skirt. And so I think that I was a physicist first. I learned how to think analytically like a physicist. But what's come out of the past 54 years of studying the physics of biological systems is an incredible admiration of the glory of biology. Biology is just something that's absolutely incredible. And so, just to cut to the quick, I have been in conversations where a scientist might claim that science is based on fact and religion is based on faith. And I came to the conclusion that science is, in fact, fundamentally based on faith. If you go all the way back, you end up having faith that the laws of physics work, that there is a fundamental assumption in science, which is that the laws of science or the laws of physics or chemistry govern the operation of the universe. And so I have a profound respect for the elegance of the physical laws that allow us to create the absolute beauty of biology. The manifestations in biology, all the different forms of life are the result of billions of years of evolution and innumerable experiments of what didn't work. But that is a deep found sense of respect. And the sadness I feel when an animal goes extinct is succinctly, you have just lost the solution, one solution to the equation of life. So that's why I don't think you should let things go extinct, because they are something you'll never get back. It's a solution to the equation of life. So I would like to open that with the fact that I do not believe in the supernatural. I don't believe in divine intervention. If you could find a fifth force that supported divine intervention, one, it'd be a free trip to Stockholm, and two, it would answer lots of questions. But right now I'm counting on the fact there are 4 laws in physics, and everything we see is ultimately the derivative of that plus a lot of dumb luck.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So before this conversation, we also talked about how there are some parts of the world, we want this better, this perfect world, but there are parts that can be a dumpster fire, parts that are broken and hard. And then we also talked about here in trying to define art, there can be beauty. In biology, there is beauty. So I wanted to see if you all could expand more upon how brokenness and beauty, what they are and what their roles can be or should be in making this better, if not perfect, world.
Oh man, how do we solve the world's problems in this conversation? It seems to me that most art, actually I'll quote Professor Tolkien on this. He said, all great art, if it's truly great, is about death. And I think that's the riddle that we're all trying to solve. We're all basically trying to rewrite just the first line of our obituary when we make stuff. We're like, will this make the first sentence, right? Like, how do you Ozymandias, like is it capable to make anything that is going to last and is going to matter? It seems like we all want to matter very much, and yet the forces of the universe seem to tell us that, like, it's really hard to matter. It's a pretty big universe that's pretty cruel. And when I make art, a lot of the comics in that Holy Ghost book are about these thoughts in a lot of ways. And one of the ones I made when it comes to, like, thinking about a metaphor for art is, like, it feels like we're all just making sandcastles, and you enjoy it for a minute, and then the waves come, and it's back to where you began. And so I think in some ways our longing to sort of leave a mark on this world, kind of says, like, we feel like we should matter more, and yet everything around us is saying that we don't in a lot of ways.
I have a very good friend who, for many years, worked a farm in Santa Fe, which is about 40 miles south of here. And he finally got himself a license plate labeled Entropy, because he realizes that in trying to run this farm in rural Tennessee, and by the time I met him, he no longer had any cattle on it, He was fighting entropy. And so basically, life is fighting the natural forces of confusion and entropy. I've come to the conclusion that in light of what John was saying, it's not the product that counts, it's the process. I've been on planning committees, and they come up with a planning report. And I've come to the conclusion that planning reports are fine, but it's the product. The process is what counts, what you get together. I hope what comes out of tonight, it's not the product of tonight. There won't be a tangible recommendation from us as to how to solve the problems of the world, but the process of discussing is what's going to count. So you have that fantastic cartoon in The Holy Ghost about the squirrel and the Holy Ghost are lying on a blanket looking at the stars one night and commenting that in 5 billion years, there's going to be no trace of humankind in the universe. And the comment from that was the comment from the Holy Ghost, and the squirrel says, well, I didn't want to be that irrelevant. So you have to decide, ultimately, we're all going to be dust. Now, if you listen to Freeman Dyson, we could be thinking dust, but that's a separate issue of do you find life as form or function. The bottom line is what counts is process, and the process is trying to make the world a better place and fight entropy. So if I had to pick a goal, it's fight entropy, fight confusion, fight evil.
Yeah, I'm always just struck with this thought of like looking around the world and the simultaneous like dissonance of it's so beautiful and it's so horrible simultaneously, right? And how do you square that circle? Because it feels like the world is not the way it was meant to be. Or like things shouldn't be a certain way. I had a student of mine die last year tragically after a long battle with stomach cancer, and I looked at he was such a talented illustrator. He had so much work left to do on this planet, and I just look at that and I'm like, that is not the way it should be. And yet you look around the world and there's just so many examples of things that are miracles, like how do our eyes work? Butterflies just like do their own thing and fly from Mexico to Canada every year. Like what in the world? So yeah, there's a ton of contrary messages flying into our minds about what it means to be alive and how you situate your like purpose in the universe if you have anything. If you have a purpose. And the problem is, I think, that to me, if there is not a God underneath the beautiful divine architecture of the universe, then like I feel like then any meaning we feel in our lives is kind of cruel, or like it's kind of an illusion that our brain has sort of cast over us. And and that for me feels grim in a way that death alone is like one thing, but that level of sort of bleakness is a different thing to me.
I will counter that with my definition of God is an equivalent statement to the laws of physics. So you look at the laws of physics, and that is equivalent to my God. Some people have a God that creates the Earth 6,000 years ago and puts the fossils in just to confuse the scientists. That God could, in fact, have to work very hard to get all the photons lined up between here and Arcturus so that every time we look at a photon, it's coming, though it was only placed there 6,000 years ago. I've argued that, in fact, if you have ultimate faith, the universe could have been created 2 weeks ago, and everything in your brain that thinks occurred longer than 2 weeks ago was implanted by this all-powerful God that created the universe. So there's a question of arbitrary. My God is, in fact, extraordinarily powerful. A button is pushed, and all of this beauty comes. And so I don't find that at all disturbing. As other people might. But you made a comment that was sad. I don't think it's sad. I think it's absolutely incredibly beautiful. And what is beautiful is the possibilities that can allow. So I think my goal is to leave the world, in the idea of process, leave the world a better place than it was when I came. Because I'm not going to necessarily be able to leave a lasting mark on the world. I'm going to try to make the world a better place for those around me and those that follow me. It's transient in the context of the squirrel. It's 5 billion years, we're all dust.
Yeah, okay, did we do it? Did we answer all the questions? Great. Adjourned? No? Oh.
You thought. So I've got one more up here, and then we also have a Slido if you all want to keep putting in your questions, but I have one more just from me. So I'm a 21-year-old woman up here, right? I'm in college, as many of you are out in the audience. And we're like, okay, we're going to go into dust. That's crazy. And we have our God as physics, our God as this cool architect guy, potentially. How... Yeah, you never know. He said squirrel, so that'd be great. There's a lot of squirrels here.
The squirrel is a very, very sharp squirrel. The badger is a bit of a cynic, but the squirrel is very sharp.
Mm-hmm. Don't trust it. And then it's like, what do we trust? But more than that, on a day-to-day basis, if it's about the process, how does what we believe about this affect how we live every single day? Making this quote-unquote good life. Can you add some more about what it looks like second to second, minute to minute with these beliefs? The process of creating this. One last thing before Q&R.
Oh, yeah, these are great questions. I mean, one of the weird things, I think that actually tracks with what you're saying. I don't even really disagree with anything you're saying. I totally agree. The universe is like this resplendent object that's like extremely wasteful or excessive. It's just like, it's like way too much. Like a tree will put out, billions of leaves during the course of its life, just to lose them all and then regrow them. Like there's a sort of uselessness to beauty in the universe that's sort of incredible and astonishing. And so when you look around and you think, wow, every sunset I've ever seen was there for a moment and then gone, never to return.
But how did the sunset leave you feeling?
Yeah. Small.
So the sunset actually lasts, but it lasts in your mind and your spirit.
Right.
So it's not totally transient.
Yeah. Well, but until I turn into dust.
And you also cartoon it, so you can draw one hell of a sunset,
right.
I think.
See, but that's what I'm talking about. In your mind as an artist, you're like, what if I make the thing that lasts forever? Like, there's this ambition, this like desire to make the object that will allow me to be forever. Like, I have a friend who calls it your like immortality project. Like everybody's got their little immortality project and it's like kind of secret. Maybe you won't tell anyone, but you think like, man, what if I'm going to write the song that's on the radio forever or whatever that thing is that like, I do think like, man, what if I made a great work of art that inspired people for 500 years? And then you pause and you're like, I doubt that any trace of my existence will be around in 100 years, let alone 500 years. Right. So then, that leaves you with the question then, why do anything at all, right? Why just eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die, right? So just pure hedonism also seems like a pretty bad response to the sort of nihilistic tendency to be like, it's not going to matter at all.
Hedonism increases entropy, doesn't decrease it, so it's not a good idea.
Write that down. That's really funny.
These are physics jokes.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm pro entropy, if anyone's counting. I think. No?
Entropy will win.
That's true.
All right, so we're on to the Q&R now. There will be a wonderful Josh that is running microphones, and then I have a Slido here. Our first question on the Slido is, where are the significant gray areas that prevent us from realizing a perfect world? So black and white, what's your take on color? Anything you want to share?
Well, I mean, at the very like baseline of it is like, if we all got together and just described what a good world looked like, I mean, would we be sort of 90% the same? Would we be 50% the same? I mean, what kind of standard do you even use for what good is or what is most efficient? Or, I mean, one thing, if we really care about like the idea of justice, it seems like justice to the universe is sort of a figment of our imagination, right? So like even the basic idea of justice has to be founded on some common agreement about what goodness is, and even an agreement that evil has come into the world at all. I mean, one of the comics I have in there talks about if a supernova could be considered evil. because it has way more destructive power than any single human being on Earth.
But you wouldn't be on this planet. You wouldn't be anything had it not been for the supernova that created all the heavy elements that are inside of you.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So you are the product of a supernova.
That's right. So we can't. So a supernova is good, if we think of it that way. Yeah, that's a great point. I don't remember what was the question.
To restate it again, where are the significant gray areas that prevent us from realizing a perfect world? If you have any more to share.
People who don't share our views.
Yeah, that's right. So then what do we? So then what do we do when people don't agree with us, right? I mean, we're seeing this play out now in America in various ways, right? Like, do we think that our ideas always win? Do we agree that there's a kind of pluralism that we have to celebrate that allows human beings to sort of be confident in their views, but also relax towards others who disagree because of this sort of shared idea of pluralism in America or the world? Yeah. I mean, guys, I went to art school. I'm getting way out of my depth here.
You shouldn't be out of your depth. This is what art's all about.
That's right.
I mean, art is just basically a way to express feelings. I mean, when you think about it, physics is not necessarily the medium of choice when you want to express your feelings.
Yeah. Is that why you went into physics?
I don't know. It may have been the reason I married an artist.
That's right. You keep him sane, right? Yeah.
So I think the problem really is going back to entropy. There are all sorts of forces that push people in different directions: economic, historical, social, and there are a lot of people who are self-serving and self-serving behavior. Whether you're a oligarch or whatever, you know, a robber baron in the earlier eras. The thing we have a shortage of in general simply is empathy. And if you figured out a recipe to increase empathy, you mentioned pluralism, but the point is you have to be able to look at a problem from someone else's side. So if you can view problems from both sides and maintain balance, I think you're better off than if you look at a problem and say, my solution to that problem is the only solution, it's the correct solution, and anybody who disagrees with you should be shot. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it turns out in my class last semester, we found a case of a Georgian microbiologist who was developing phage therapy, and he made the mistake of going after the same woman that Beria, Stalin's KGB master, was interested in. Stalin's KGB master Beria had this guy assassinated. So that's not really playing fair. I mean, that's the process of courting gone completely amok. You assassinate the person that you're competing with. Mm-hmm. So the trick is, that's an extreme case of lack of empathy. I think that it's important to look at every problem on the earth as, are these people suffering? Why are they suffering? What could someone do to reduce that suffering, reduce the general entropy of the planet? And that probably means being more sharing and giving, because if there's a finite amount of energy to be distributed, you can't have it all.
Yeah. Well, I think actually that's one of the powers that art has, is the ability to generate empathy in others, because it does allow us to see things that maybe we wouldn't see in any other way, whether it's a film that gives us a point of view of a community we're not a part of, a painting that comes from an experience that no one else can have. Even, you know, when you think of religious art, of categorizing the transcendent into imagery, you know, the reason that they painted on the walls of chapels in Italy is that most of the people couldn't read, and there was use in images to transmit things that were basically unseeable. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the reasons I do make art is because of feelings, even though my art is not for expression. My art, I think, is made for communication. But of course, all art is an expressive medium in some form. But again, that kind of is the divide between design thinking and works that would hang in a gallery, let's say. But
now we have something specifically for Dr. Wikswo. I know he doesn't like the term doctor. He wants to go by John. But How do human emotions like empathy and love fit into the laws of nature?
They are an emergent phenomenon that, where do feelings come from? Feelings come from neural networks. Neural networks can exist because of the fact that if you put 10 to the 11th neurons into a small container, you may get consciousness out. Apparently, one of the things you get out is feelings. I do not know why feelings come out. My guess is that if you were really being cynical, you'd say, well, feelings have an evolutionary value. If you feel close to someone, you will protect that person, and the odds of that person and your offspring surviving are increased. So I could argue there's an evolutionary drive for both good and bad feelings. So if you want to be aggressive and kill the enemy that's attacking you, that's actually a feeling that is good for your survival, not for the enemy's. And warm feelings propagate the species.
I mean, isn't that sort of a bummer, though, to think like deep down love is like kind of an illusion of our minds, though? Or do you?
I don't think it's an illusion. I think it's an absolutely fantastic creation of the mind. The fact that you can, I've many times asked my students to try to figure out how to program a robot to have free will. And it turns out if you work the logic correctly, you devise a decision engine, and you can come to 6 significant digits on the score in your choice between 2 things you're going to decide on. And the bottom line, you're going to come to a problem that has, you don't know, you have to flip a coin. So you flip the coin, and the little algorithm in your brain that flips the coin says, you will go to the movie, not the park, and I made that decision because I have free will. So free will may not be anything more than a random number generator, but it really feels good. And there's nothing wrong with it.
Like the 2-slit experiment from the photons, basically?
Yeah. So the point is that emotions, feelings of warmth, love, charity, they all have benefits to society as a whole. I don't know the extent to which love could evolve in an isolated single entity. I guess you could have narcissism could evolve, right. But you'd have to have a mirror for that.
I have this amazing quote from Frederick Buechner on this. I wrote this down because I thought it might come up. He's talking about like this phenomenon, or like the way life feels, like if love is basically like a phenomenon or illusion. And he says this: even at its worst, life doesn't feel like a black comedy. And he's saying that, like, if love was not tethered to anything real, but was like a collection of chemicals in our mind or whatever, that would be like kind of the worst joke ever made on creatures. But
I think it's I don't think it's the worst joke made on creatures. I think it's a fantastic testimony to the power of chemistry.
Yeah.
If you can figure out the chemistry that makes you fall in love with somebody, this is really beautiful.
Do you think, we are derailing this. Hey, what do you think about AI? Do you think AI can get to that place in a relatively, like if it was left on it, like an LLM is just left on its own, do you think it could replicate love in that way? I truly just am curious.
I do not think so.
Wait a second. Are you a large language model?
Yes.
You have to tell me if I ask. No, okay, so Buechner says, even at its worst, life doesn't feel like a black comedy. It feels like a mystery. It feels as though at the innermost heart of it, there is something we might call holiness. And the things that we experience in the world that are horrors, that go on around us and within us, we experience them as horrors and not just as, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles, because in our innermost hearts, we belong to something that is more like holiness. And to me, that tracks with like, oh yeah, that's why I think the world is like terrible sometimes. And yet I feel like I'm not attached to that terribleness, or like I'm outside of that narrative of terrible things. You know what I mean?
I don't know how to solve the problem of the terrible population versus the non-terrible population. And I've always wondered, does the terrible population think they are wonderful and that we are terrible? And I tend to...
Who gets to decide?
Yes, who gets to... I tend to think that it's not that easy. So I'm not about to give the terrible people a free pass because they think they're great. I happen to know they're wrong, but that... But the point is, you have to decide the perspective. And if you look at what you do to make the world feel better, that would be a measure of terribleness. And so if you can do something that enriches you and your closest friends and makes a lot of other people miserable, they are very happy. But the integral under that curve is negative. And so the trick is, can you do something that enlightens or lifts the larger population? And so my view on a lot of this is it's much of what we're seeing are social interactions that are programmed deep into our brains, both by wiring and by chemistry.
But
we
can
talk more about brain chemistry in a little bit if anybody's interested, because there's some new results that are fascinating on that, but we can wait on that.
Yeah, but some of those interactions are terrible, right?
Oh, yeah. There's all sorts out there.
But of course, how do we, but then how do I know if my brain is doing the right things if it's just chemicals, if I have a sense that things are terrible? Like, how do I, like C.S. Lewis always talked about this, if my brain is the thing that has given me the ability to discern truth in the universe, how do I trust it as a sort of ontological thing that I can trust even to begin with, right? Just like you were saying, like implanting memories into our brain from the creation of the universe could be absolutely something that happened, right?
Yeah, so I mean, at some point you take it on faith.
Yeah. And scene.
Yes, thank you. This has been upvoted so many times. Peeps want to see you draw. So can you, I know, can you draw the perfect world? Would that be possible here? Could you?
Really high bar.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, he's going to try. He's going to try.
Let me, here,
Now, you picked up a black pen.
yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's, why'd you pick up a black pen?
I feel intimidated by that color.
I don't believe in black pens.
All right.
Red pens make doctors nervous. If you ever want to make a doctor nervous, take a red pen to your clinic visit.
I used to work, one of my early jobs I had, I fell backwards into an amazing job when I lived in New York City. I worked at the New York Times, and one of the things we feared at the New York Times was a green pen, because the managing editor would go through the paper every day and mark all the errors with a green pen. And he was the only person in the entire paper who was allowed to use the green pen. All right, I think that the Holy Ghost believes that the perfect world is a giant cookie. Yay! Wait, okay. Actually, there's something crazy I can show you about. This is from the book. Dorothy Sayers had this unbelievable thing, speaking of the Holy Ghost and the Trinity. She mapped on, in this amazing book by Dorothy Sayers called Mind of the Maker, she mapped art making on top of the idea of the Christian Trinity in this really interesting way. This is a little in the weeds, but it's kind of cool. Like that in the idea of the Father, there is like the idea, like the big idea. Like when I come up with an idea, that represents in the Trinity the Father. And that when you make that idea, when you like manifest it and incarnate it, that is the Son. And of course, every time you go from this to this, it requires pain, basically. Like it's costly to make an idea. It takes a lot of work and hard sweat, blood, tears, all that.
Metabolic energy.
That's right. Thank you. Entropy. Wait.
Well, no, you're fighting entropy.
Right. I'm fighting it. Thank you. Let's write that here. Fighting entropy. And then, once the work is made and it goes out into the world, this is the Holy Ghost part. It's the power of the idea, like when it meets an audience or when someone sees it, like whatever it does to you, that is this own particular thing. And what's cool about it is like all these things are the idea or are the piece of art, but they're all separate and they have their own sort of like space to make this sort of individual contribution to your mind and your heart. And like I read that in that book, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. First of all, I wanted to draw it. And second of all, it like sort of tracked onto a lot of the things I've felt about art making. And it's just kind of cool to overlay it to some like Trinitarian ideas.
Can you quickly draw me a murmuration of birds?
Yes.
Don't erase that.
No,
don't erase that.
Okay,
I
wait.
want you in the lower left-hand corner to draw a murmuration of birds. And so has anybody seen the videos of the starlings over Rome that fly in these hydrodynamic waves of black birds? So it turns out that I would argue in your notation, John, that the Holy Ghost is in fact emergence. Collective behavior from individual parts where you do not predict a property from any of the individual pieces, but collectively something comes out. And so what happens is that would be my definition of the Holy Ghost in this thing, is that you have the idea, you make the bird, and then you make so many birds and give them the ability to communicate visually that, in fact, you create these structures that you would never imagine. Somebody hands you a starling. You got a starling sitting there at your kitchen table. Are you going to think you're going to get a cloud of this waves flowing through the skies of Rome? No, but it turns out if you get yourself 100,000 starlings and they can talk to each other, just not bumping into their wingtips, you get these beautiful structures. You take an individual neuron. Is an individual neuron very smart? No, you take 10 to the 11th of them and you get a beautiful person. So much of what society... Thank you.
10 to the 11th birds.
That's fine, but,
that's right.
But the point is that you've completed the triangle, you've created the bird, which is no mean feat. You try to build a bird from scratch. You go to the Lego store and you try to build a flying, working bird.
Impossible.
It's impossible. Well, no, it's not impossible. It's just very, 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 very hard.
Okay.
It's going to take you a billion years to figure it out.
Correct.
Okay. But you then, once you've succeeded in making the bird, like humans are the only 70-kilogram, nonlinear, feedback-controlled robot that can be mass-produced by unskilled labor.
Write that down.
Well, it turns out that was actually in an argument that NASA used to try to justify astronauts. But so it's not my original thought. But it's interesting to think people are these incredible robots that can be mass-produced by totally unskilled labor. And what happens now is that societies, religions, societies and religions enough, communities, come when you put a whole pile of people together. And the emergent phenomena can either be good or evil. And the trick is to fight the formation of the evil murmurations. So if you think the sardines are cute, and then you look at a pack of sharks coming in to clean out a school of sardines, you ask, is this good or bad? Well, it's life. But the point is that I would argue that the murmuration that you've drawn is a perfect example of bringing all sorts of amazing little parts together to make something that's even better.
Wow. Guys, what a collaboration. Great job.
Good murmuration.
I did. I drew one in there, so I had practice.
Yes. Our next question that has the most upvotes is, what argument for God do you find the strongest? Why does it fail? And then specifically for John Hendrix, why do you believe in Jesus?
Oh, man. Well, I got to say that to me, the humans are really bad at knowing evil when it is happening. This is a weird phenomenon that we think we're really good at detecting when evil is going on, and then you look back at history and it turns out we're really super bad at it. Like, we always think that we're on the good side and that we're wearing the white hat and everyone else is wearing the black hat. But I did a graphic novel about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German theologian who tried to kill Hitler. And he was basically one of a handful of people who was screaming, hey, there's something going on here that's pretty bad. And so to me, the sort of notion of evil itself, where did evil come from? And what is our answer to it ultimately? What is the thing that rebuts it? What is the thing that we, at the end of the day, are we called to, through our own effort, squash this massive problem with humanity? And it just feels like a really overwhelming proposition. So the scholar Alan Jacobs says something about C.S. Lewis. he was an atheist most of his life, became a Christian after becoming friends with Professor Tolkien. I just did a whole graphic novel about this, so I'm so sorry you're hearing so many quotes about Lewis and Tolkien. But basically, Alan Jacobs says that Lewis became a Christian not because he had to like adopt a set of particular beliefs, but because he had to learn to hear a story the right way. And so to me, it's a story, or it's a mythology that echoes in my heart in a way that no other story does. And so again, those aren't a collection of like belief propositions or value statements or position papers. To me, it's that the longing for meaning and sort of finding a purpose. We got another one?
I'm trying to look out there also if anyone's waving me down for live questions also. Is it a thing? It's not a thing. It's not a thing. Okay, so our other question we have is, if entropy is going to win, why do we try and fight it? Doesn't every action result in net entropy anyways? If we want to talk more about that topic from either of you, Wikswo.
Okay, the key thing about entropy, so Aaron Schrödinger, who happened to be a German physicist-eugenicist, who felt that his duty to society was to impregnate as many young German women as possible to spread his genes. He was not necessarily a nice person, but he invented quantum mechanics. So it turns out that he made a fatal mistake. He wrote a book, What is Life? And he came to the conclusion that biology had a source of negative entropy. And he built his whole book around that concept of negative entropy. And some very famous scientists wrote that his contribution to biology was negative. And the headlines on the story at the 25th anniversary of this great book was Aaron Schrödinger, physicist or philanderer. So Schrödinger had a mixed history, but the bottom line was what Schrödinger missed was that biology is driven by the energy coming from the sun, or the energy stored in the deep earth, let's say with sulfide chemistry or something. So and it turns out that he didn't understand Gibbs free energy, which is basically there is an entropic contribution to energy, and there's a chemical contribution to energy. So what really counts is he forgot the fact that as we are all fighting entropy, which is a natural phenomenon, we're doing it because the sun is shining on us. We want to make sure that the sun keeps shining us at the proper temperature, or we're going to get cooked or drowned. So the point is that the fighting of entropy is built into the laws of physics as long as you don't push them past their breaking point. So I don't have a problem with the fact that you're fighting entropy. We have the gift to us of energy from the sun that allows us to fight entropy. Go for it.
Yeah. One of those, I think this is almost like one of those word riddles. I'd love to have your take on this, but it's one of those things that people often say to refute the idea that maybe we're all just atoms in the universe. Of you put your laundry in a laundry machine and you hit the button, and do you ever expect you're going to open it and have all the laundry folded in there? And it just seems absurd. And
no, it's possible. It's just very, very, very unlikely.
It's very. See, I just feel like, will it ever really be folded? Do you think there's one time it will be folded out of 1 billion?
If you did a million washer loads, it might happen.
10 to the 11th times 10 to the 11th.
Like that. 10 to the 11th is a big number.
Yeah. I wouldn't know.
Look at how many times life has evolved on this planet in 3 or 4 billion years. It is, and it looks like we are all the descendants of a single life-bearing event. There may have been others, but they're gone. There's no evidence for more than one origin of life. So it's not a very likely thing to happen. So the odds of you getting your laundry folded by your washing machine are, in fact, extraordinarily unlikely. I would not wait up for it.
Right. Do you think it's likely there is life in other worlds? I mean, does that seem just like a mathematical certainty, just because of the scale of the universe?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be impossible to find it.
Because it's hard to get there.
It's hard to get there.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the Drake equation, which was kind of a nonsense equation, basically calculated. So one of the great, I can't remember which which great physicist said, if there's life, where is it? Well, it turns out it's far, far away, and it's very, very small. And what's worse, it may be only transient.
Yeah.
So how long will intelligent life last on this planet before it kills itself?
Right. Yeah, there's this hilarious short story that's about these like cyborg robots on another planet, like detecting signals from Earth, and they're having a conversation about it. And they're like, hey, Claude, come over here. You're not going to believe this. I've got a signal from Quadrant 7, Sector 8. And he's like, oh, wow, tell me about it. And he's like, it's meat. And he's like, what? Yeah, the meat. The meat is talking. And he's like, what do you mean the meat is talking? Yeah, there's sentient meat, and it's making signals. And he's like, that's absurd. That could never happen. You're telling me that meat has made these signals? And the whole essay goes on like this, that make you, it's like one of those magical things that the more you read it, the more you realize how absurd it is that we're doing anything, and we're just animated skeletons walking around. I mean, it's, yeah, we should find that short story. I think it was shared on NPR. Yeah.
You are an extraordinarily improbable event.
Thank you. I think that's a compliment. You know what? Use that on your next date.
Oh, Julia likes that. Julia likes it. All right, so we've got one more question for Wikswo, and then another last question. Dr. Wikswo, is there an argument for God that you found has been pretty strong? And then if so, why has that one failed? Or why do most of the ones for God, other than if you say the laws of physics is your God, is there another one outside of that that you could see could have probability, or they all fail?
For me, the laws of physics being equivalent to God is, for me, a totally self-consistent position. The thing is that what I do not believe in is an interventionist God. And I don't believe in supernatural, what I mean by supernatural ghosts or any phenomena. But back up. If you can find something that's
What about cryptids? No?
I don't know what a cryptid is.
Oh, like a Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot? No.
I know, Bigfoot's perfectly fine. You just find it and I'll believe it. But you got to find it first. So the point is, if you can find a source for that is supernatural. So natural means described by the laws of physics, their derivative laws of chemistry and the derivative laws of biology. If you can find something that isn't that, it's a free trip to Stockholm. Yeah. And I grew up in a community where people were, my peers of mine, mentors of mine, were all chasing the free trip to Stockholm by trying to find something that violated the laws of physics. And that included one of my classmates who was trying to figure out whether the classic Etvos experiment, you drop a feather and you drop a ball, do they fall at the same speed? Well, it turns out at the time he was doing this, they fell at the same speed to a part in 10 to the 10th, which means the difference in the speed was 0 with 10 zeros and a 2. And that was 2 plus or minus 2. So there was no definitive statement that the feather and the ball would fall at different rates. And his goal for his career was to add 2 more decimal places to that. Because if he could show that it was not 0 at the 12th decimal place, it was free trip to Stockholm. I've chosen not to play that game. And if somebody can find me a supernatural force, more power to them. My life is self-consistent without the need for a supernatural force.
What do you think about the multiverse as a concept? I know you're not an astrophysicist, but does that hold water with you as an idea?
For those of you who don't know what the multiverse...
So, okay, string theory really quickly. No, go ahead. No, sorry.
Basically, that there could exist out there or inside or below us somewhere an entire other multiple different universes occurring in parallel. It's a mathematical possibility. I think it's meaningless to worry about it because there's no way to test it, no way it can affect us.
We can't get to the other multiverses.
And I'm not going to try to find the wormhole machine that does it for me.
Yeah.
But there'll be people who will make a living trying to calculate the energy required to get a wormhole to go to a multiverse. More power to them. It's an academic fool's errand.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's not a fool's errand. It's fine. They can do it. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah. I had this idea that maybe the multiverse was a way to understand like God's sovereignty in a way, or like how could God know all the outcomes of everything at once, or know every choice that we're ever going to make? Like, oh, if he's outside time and all these multiverses exist, he just is present in all of them simultaneously. And done.
See, but my God is a different God that says, look at all the things that you could do if you did it right. So my God is a God of absolute total possibility because it tells you every possible thing that could come out, and you have to have the imagination to uncover it. Now, if you uncover something that you think you violated the laws of physics, but you're wrong, you basically are guided back to what is true. So the idea, my God is powerful enough to basically guide me to do things that are right. And I happen to define much of the marvel of biology is that we find it beautiful. Now, what defines beauty? What defines beauty? Oh. Somebody walks up to your picture and they say, beautiful. I say, why do you call my picture beautiful? Have you ever done a beautiful picture?
It's such a good question. I hate most of my work, but that's my own problem. But yes, I think I have been able to replicate beauty. I think beauty is basically a mimetic act. It's an act of mimicking the cosmos. It's an act of, in my mind, mimicking the creationary acts of the creator. Like we make in the manner in which we were made. So, we are made by a maker who made myths, and so we make myths, right? We have the power to create ex nihilo like God in our minds, in our imaginations, because we are shadows or copies of that same personality in a way. But yes, so I think beauty is like a mimetic form.
So you go out and lie on the blanket next to the Holy Ghost and the squirrel and look at the sky. And from my point of view, the universe, the Milky Way, it is just absolutely gorgeous. And that is the product of my God.
Yeah. Same.
Amazing. Beautiful conversation. If you want to give one last nugget to all these college students, it can be encouragement, advice, tell us a no thing we shouldn't do, we should do, what would it be? Before we bring up our friends to close.
You got one off the top of your head?
I'm going to vote for empathy. So as if just look around you and look, what do you have to do to experience empathy for whatever you see?
I mean, I teach a lot of young people. We both have taught young people for a long time. I would say, just be kind to yourself. Be patient. You have a lot to figure out. You have a huge life ahead of you. Ambition is great. Ambition also is a double-edged sword. And so I would say give yourself time to make errors and make mistakes. That's the only way that you learn. And it really sucks. Believe me, learning is terrible because it's painful. It's doing something for the first time. You have to, people have to see you trying hard at something and not doing well. So, normalize struggle in your life. I think that is kind of aligning yourself with an act of holiness in a way. I think, especially in the Christian framework, aligning yourself with struggle is okay. You do not need to be fully formed at your age. So, enjoy learning things and read some things for fun once in a while. Okay.
I'd like to comment on that. In a thermodynamic engine, a steam engine, you have a source of heat, and you have the place where you put the waste heat at the other end of the steam engine. It turns out I have a list of uncompleted manuscripts that I worry about, and I've come to the conclusion that they are the waste heat out of my steam engine. So all of the mistakes you make are the waste heat that came out of your engine of life. And unless you are able to have no mistakes and no waste heat because you happen to have a reservoir of absolute zero, it's a fact of life. You will make mistakes. The trick is to learn from them and get something useful out of it. So you're going to invest metabolic energy. You're going to try to learn something. You'll make a mistake. You will learn from the mistake. So it's not totally wasted.
There you go. There you go. Thank you so much. Josh, I want to invite him up to close and thank everyone for coming.